The cold steel of the handcuffs clicked shut around Father Matt's wrists as he sat slumped in the back of the police car. His eyes, once full of compassion, now flickered with a strange calmness. The officers had expected resistance, perhaps a last-ditch attempt to flee or beg for mercy, but there was nothing, only silence. Father Matt, the beloved parish priest of St. Augustine's Church, had been leading a double life for years, a life that would forever shatter the trust of a small town that had once revered him as a pillar of faith. His involvement in an armed robbery ring, a gang of ruthless kidnappers, had been a secret to all until it wasn't. It started innocently enough. Every Sunday after Mass, Father Matt would walk among his congregation, offering kind words, soothing prayers, and encouragement to those who needed it. But behind the warm smile and the priestly robes, he was no ordinary shepherd of souls. For years, he had carefully orchestrated a scheme that made him both feared and revered. Whenever people fell victim to a robbery in the town, they would turn to him. They came with heavy hearts, showing up at his office or during confession, desperate to speak to someone who would listen. And Father Matt listened, truly listened, as if the burdens of their lives were as heavy on his soul as they were on theirs. And then, as if by fate, he would offer them just enough money to keep their lives going, to repair the damage left by the criminals who had robbed them. He was the angel, the comforter, the savior, but none of them knew the truth. Father Matt wasn't just their priest. He was the architect of their suffering. His gang had been terrorizing the town for months, raiding homes and businesses under the cover of darkness. Armed men with masks would storm in, demanding money, jewelry, anything of value. No one was ever harmed, but the psychological trauma was immense. People would cry, plead for mercy, and then, when the gang left, they were left with nothing but fear. And they would turn to Father Matt. It was all part of the plan. He didn't partake in the robberies, no, that was beneath him. His role was to observe. He would identify those who had the means to help the church, those who were just a bit too comfortable in their wealth. Once they were targeted, their names were brought to him by the people who donated privately to the church. In return for their generosity, Father Matt would offer a listening ear, comforting words, and sometimes a small amount of cash to ease the pain. But he wasn't just comforting them. He was fishing for information. Slowly, he would coax them into revealing secrets about their families, about friends who could afford to support the church, or about people who might be more vulnerable, people who could be useful. That's when the real terror began. Once Father Matt knew enough, he would pass the information on to his gang. The next phase wasn't just robbery, it was kidnapping. The wealthy families of the town would disappear, held for ransom by masked men who spoke in hushed tones. The town would be paralyzed with fear, and still, the parish priest would stand as the face of calm, the beacon of hope. He would pray for the families for their safe return while secretly reaping the rewards of the ransoms. The town had no idea that the man they trusted more than anyone else had been orchestrating this silent destruction from behind the altar. For Father Matt, it was never about the money. It was about power, the power of knowing what others would never dare to suspect. It was about control. As his wealth grew, so did his arrogance. He started traveling to a nearby city, away from the watchful eyes of his parishioners, where he spent the money he had earned on pleasures that no one would have ever imagined. He would visit nightclubs and indulge in extravagant meals, drink to excess, and frequent the company of prostitutes. The money from his donations was his ticket to a life of luxury, far removed from the small town that had given him so much. It was the sheer recklessness of his actions that ultimately led to his downfall. One evening, after a particularly lucrative ransom had been paid, Father Matt made one critical mistake. He was spotted. A woman who had once been a victim of his kidnappers recognized him in a club, her face etched with the unmistakable marks of fear. She had been one of the few who had gotten away, and now, in the haze of the club lights, she saw him for who he truly was. The woman didn't waste time. She contacted the authorities immediately, giving them details of where she had seen him. A week later, they had enough evidence. Father Matt was arrested while he was indulging in a night of excess, his hands trembling not from the cold of the handcuffs, but from the realization that his life was over. The trial was a spectacle. The small town was rocked to its core. Those who had once trusted him as a man of God now stared in disbelief as the truth came to light. The very man they had turned to for solace, for guidance, was the mastermind behind the terror that had plagued their lives. The victims spoke out, their voices filled with anger, but also with sadness. Many couldn't reconcile the image of the kind, compassionate priest with the criminal they had learned about in court. Father Matt didn't fight the charges. He didn't have to. The evidence was overwhelming, and his silence was his confession. The townspeople no longer looked at the church with reverence. The building that had once been a place of refuge had become a symbol of betrayal. In the end, Father Matt was sentenced to life in prison. The money he had once used to buy his freedom and luxury was now gone, spent on pleasures he could no longer enjoy. His days of holding power, of playing with lives like they were chess pieces, were over. But the damage he left behind could never be repaired. The town, once a peaceful and trusting place, would never be the same. The families he had destroyed, the lives he had ruined, would carry the scars forever. And the church? The pews sat empty. People had lost their faith, not just in the priest, but in the very idea of trust and salvation. The silence of the town was deafening, as the weight of the years of deceit slowly sank in. Father Matt would never see the outside world again, and in his cell, the echoes of his once adoring congregation would be the only company he had left. And perhaps, in the quiet of his solitary confinement, he would finally hear the voices of those he had betrayed, the ones who had trusted him with their hearts and their lives.